Hello there, Breffney O'Kelly, buyer's agent here. If you're someone who is thinking of buying a property in Ireland, but you're not familiar with the whole Irish conveyancing process, you'd like to feel a bit of confidence perhaps about the legal process of buying and owning a property in Ireland, well, you're going to be interested in today's conversation because I'm talking today to James Ryan. And James is a solicitor working in a country practice, PP Ryan and Co. He's also a farmer, so he's familiar with the land. And James and I talked through the step-by-step process involved in the legal part of buying a property in Ireland. And James explains how long it typically takes, how much it can typically cost, the various steps along the way, the point at which the process is legally binding, the point at which you really do have to go ahead and buy this property, the point at which you're committed. And he also talks about some of the things he's seen throw a spanner in the works along the way, none of which have proved to be insurmountable. So if you are concerned about the legalities of buying and owning a property in Ireland, I think you're going to be really interested in this and get a lot of value from today's episode. So James Ryan, Irish solicitor with PP Ryan and Co. Thank you so much for joining us today. As we'll all have heard in our introduction, you're probably the busiest man in Ireland, so I really appreciate the time. So today I'd love to look at the whole process of buying a property in Ireland from a legal perspective, especially for people who perhaps aren't Irish citizens and aren't at all familiar with the buying process. So perhaps I can ask you, James, is anyone legally allowed to buy a property in Ireland?
Yeah, they're generally speaking, yes is the answer. I think the only really prerequisite we come across day to day is that they have a tax number, a PPS number, and that is ultimately so that they can kind of file a tax return when they purchase and pay stamp duty. So I think as far as I'm aware, once you have a PPS number, we're on.
Okay, and that is something maybe we'll come back to. We won't start at the PPS number because it's a bit of a fiddly thing, but let's just say it's a box that needs to be ticked and people are in a position to tick it. So anyone's legally allowed to buy a property.
And I should say maybe obviously a small caveat on that is you need to be 18, you need to be an adult, you need to be of sound mind such that so they're all the kind of the very, very fundamental building blocks. But in terms of maybe someone who might be listening to this, maybe from abroad, the real relevant one is a PPS number, which is all very doable, you know.
Yeah. Okay, great. So if you are buying a house in Ireland or a property in Ireland, do you actually need to use a solicitor or can you do it without a solicitor?
My understanding, Bethany, is you do need to use a solicitor. The conveyancing process, I'm not sure, facilitates and someone acting for themselves in the same way as there are lay litigants in court cases. But that said, I'm sure there may be ways around. But generally speaking, I've never come across a property transaction where there hasn't been solicitors. So I think the answer is a strong yes, you do.
Yeah, perfect, exactly. So we're not trying to be a boffin about it. We just want to know that in my experience and in your experience, 100% of everyone we've ever met in this property business uses a solicitor to buy a property, and it is strongly advised.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so let's just say I'm here. I've come over to Ireland on a holiday. A couple of properties have taken my fancy, or I'm looking at them online from America or Dubai or wherever, and I like the look of them. And you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and make an offer on them. I see you can do some online bidding. I think I'll just go ahead and make an offer. So let's just say I've seen the property in person when I'm here on my holidays, or I've looked at it online and I'm just taking a fancy. I'll go ahead, put in an offer on a property, and let's say my offer is accepted. Is that legally binding? If I put in a bid on a property and it's accepted, am I now committed to legally follow through on that whole thing?
Yeah, it's certainly a question we're asked a fair bit, Bethany. No is the answer. So if you're a top bidder If your bid is accepted and you even progress to the next stage of putting down a booking deposit, all those things are done subject to contract, which is a term that's bandied around. But ultimately, what that means is that until both parties sign a legally binding contract in writing, there is scope for either party to walk away and any funds paid over refunded.
Okay, so just to give people a sense of how it would work, if someone looks at a property, likes it, and they make an offer, let's say for argument's sake, a property is asking 895,000, and there's a little bit of bidding, and the bid that's the highest bid is 950,000, and that's the bid that is accepted. And let's just say that happens to be your bid. As we've just said, if your bid is accepted, it's not legally binding. But what you will be asked to do is pay a booking deposit. And you'll be asked to pay a booking deposit over to the selling estate agent. And that's usually somewhere between 1% and 3% of the price you've agreed to pay. And sometimes I have found that clients are a little bit anxious about paying over any money, thinking, well, God, this is quite a chunk of money and I'm paying it over to an estate agent I've never met. How secure is that? How confident are you that they'll get their money back if they don't go through with it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult to speak in absolute terms, but certainly we've never come across it where there's kind of been a rogue estate agent who has made off with money. But so I think it's a very it's a very robust system. It's a system that is used day in, day out, and I think there should be kind of as close to absolute faith in it as possible. Insofar as you ever pay money to anyone, it's a safe bet. Ireland's kind of legal system and the structures around it, they're really quite good. They're
Yeah.
quite. It's certainly never come up that money has gone awry.
Very good. And it might be of interest to people to know that the legal system is obviously the legal system. So we can take it that we can trust it. And then the estate agents, they are actually highly regulated. Since 2011, they are extremely regulated. Anyone can't just go ahead and get an estate agent's license. So when you're dealing with estate agents and you're dealing with solicitors, you're dealing with two highly regulated industries, both of which are regularly audited by independent auditors.
And all parties generally with professional indemnity insurance, and the reputation, like getting a practice and cert as a solicitor, or I'm sure a license as an auctioneer or estate agent. It's they're not formalities, and so I think that looms large in how all of us act. It's our profession is kind of our future in that profession is on the line for any misconduct that arises.
Sure. Okay, so just to walk us through it, we've seen a property that catches our eye. There's a bit of a bidding process, and I'll talk about that in another episode. You make a bid on it, and your bid is accepted. You are asked for a booking deposit. You pay this over to this estate agent. That's fully refundable. And now the estate agent is going to say to you, okay, Mr. Buyer or Mrs. Buyer, thank you for your booking deposit. We understand that you have given it to us subject to contract. And as you've said, everything is in limbo with lots of goodwill, subject to a contract being signed. So yes, we've made progress, but we're not legally binding. We've paid over our booking deposit. The estate agent will now ask the buyer for their solicitor's details. So let's assume you're the solicitor acting for the buyer, James.
Yeah, so once we go sale agreed, I think the auctioneer will circulate a sales advice note which gives the headline terms of the deal, the parties, the solicitors, and the price, obviously the property. Sorry, and once that's circulated, stuff will be going on in the background. Not much stuff might be happening sort of immediately obvious to every party, but for instance, the seller solicitor will be preparing or finalizing contracts and all the other documents that go with that. It's not simply just a contract that's sent out. It's all the documents to vouch, planning permission, property taxes, a slew of declarations. They will be prepared in the background. On the more practical side of the house, the purchaser, this prospective purchaser, is probably saying, now's my time before any contract is signed to have the property surveyed. And that's certainly, as a purchaser solicitor, what we'd be advising them. We'd say, now's your time, go make sure you're happy with the property, kick the tires, make sure that in your own view, you like it, you like the look and the feel of it, but also maybe from a professional's point of view, and you might get a builder or a surveyor to look over the house if you don't feel confident in your own judgment on those things. So all that kind of stuff is going on in the background. You then kind of bring up the question then of funding. If there's a bank involved for the purchaser, you'll certainly be kind of going into overdrive to, I don't know, move from kind of approval in principle to letter of offer stage, or, you know, I hope it won't be your first time to approach the bank at that stage, because I think, as we all know, the banking process is slow, to say the least. So,
and most clients buying from abroad are buying with cash, in my experience. And
yeah, absolutely. So if you're a cash buyer, we can relax on that side of the fence, and there's nothing to be done there. We're looking really then at the property, and whether or not you are actually happy with the property when it comes down to it. You're kind of, I suppose, you're looking more in more granular detail rather than an initial view, which might be rather cursory. So you might be looking at neighbors, neighborhoods, schools, all that kind of stuff. So I think at that stage, then the solicitors acting for the seller will hopefully within a week or 2 or 3 furnish contracts to the other side, say me in this case. And that's really where a lot of the legwork for a purchaser's solicitor comes into it. That is kind of what's known as an investigation of title. That's the point at which we kind of can review, you do your due diligence on the property, so to speak. So the first and most obvious thing is the person selling the property is entitled to sell the property and can ensure that the purchaser will have the property vested in them properly, efficiently, without undue delay, without undue cost. So that's because of the title system in Ireland, that has become somewhat less complicated in recent times when compared to the old registry of deeds system. But then there are other aspects that have arisen that have made those other aspects more complicated than they might have been in the process in the past. For instance, planning legislation, for instance, building control, property taxes have come and gone, and regular, like the documentation of easements and way leaves and issues which relate to, for instance, septic tank or water service, they've become more regulated and documented, and we've Irish water and we protect our water for septic tanks. All that stuff has become more document heavy. So again, it's during that investigation of title phase that all of that will be checked over to make sure we can very often take it that title will be broadly in order, because we now have this registered title system. It's far more black and white. It's blunt. It's good title, bad title, kind of, not always at all, but kind of.
Okay, so the real thing everyone wants to know is that when they buy the property, it's legally theirs, and that they actually own it, and they've got something that it has value that they can sell on. So that's kind of the absolute lowest common denominator of what's happening in the legal chain.
Absolutely. And I think just on that point, depending on the type of property, it will sometimes depend on the type of property, I should say. So if you're buying a house in rural Ireland, you're likely to be buying a freehold property with which is just absolute. There's no time limit. There is no covenants and conditions which attach to the property. You're just buying the property straight down the line, absolute ownership, kind of end of.
Okay, so to put a bit of a timeline on it, let's say we're sale agreed. The estate agent has sent out a sales advice notice to you saying, "Yep, Joe Bloggs has agreed to buy this property," and you're suggesting that maybe within 1 to 3 weeks of that time of the sale agreed notice being issued, that the seller's solicitor is likely to send you over the bag of tricks, all of the paperwork that comes with the property that's being sold. Now, 1 to 3 weeks sounds good to me. I have to say, I've seen it take longer. I'm sure you've seen it take longer too, James. Have you?
Yeah, sometimes months, and sometimes the reason for that is solicitors, maybe rightly so, sometimes they can get a bad rap, or they're very slow in getting out the contract. But sometimes when the property sale agreed, their client will swan in and say, "Hey, I'm selling the house," and you'll say, "Oh, but the title deeds are with the bank," and they say, "Yeah, can you go get them?" And you're like, "Well, we can, of course." But the bank aren't necessarily going to come back to us in a week or two. It can be a month or two,
Yeah.
it can be a long time. So the seller solicitor is really on the back foot at that point. And no matter what they do and their best endeavors, there's going to be a time lag and a delay. So it certainly is commonplace where you don't get those contracts don't issue for a month plus. But I suppose if we work on a sort of, people are generally organized about these things, the title deeds, when the property goes up in the market, they'll get the title deeds from the bank, and in the background the stuff will be renewed and updated as needs be, and it's in that kind of a scenario, you'd be hoping in 1, 2, 3 weeks that the contracts might issue.
Okay, so that documents will arrive on your desk within 3 weeks, perhaps, of the buyer being sale agreed to buy it. And then, as you say, there are a lot of things now increasingly that you need to go through. The title may be a bit simpler to determine, but the fiddly bits like the septic tanks and the building and the planning. So let's just say a pile of documents arrive on your desk on a Monday morning in relation to the purchase of a house. How long would you expect it to take to plow through all those documents and tick, tick, tick and make sure? I have my own image of, or length of time as to how long it might take for it to happen. What would you say?
That really depends from office to office, from person to person. So if you have a completely clear desk and they arrive in on a Monday morning at 10:30 onto your desk, by Monday evening, it'll be job done. By and large, it'll be job done in the review. And then sometimes where the time, let's just say, but you're a busier practitioner than that, and arrives on Monday, you don't get to look at them till Thursday morning. On Thursday morning, say you go through it all, and by Thursday evening you've gone through it. Now we have to go to our clients, say, look, this is what we found. We found that this is good, this is perfect, this is great, and all these things are perfect. However, there's a little point X, Y, and Z which we feel we need to raise queries on. And then, so on Thursday evening, the client is getting that. Maybe they'll come back Friday or Saturday or something, so it's those kind of, we need instructions kind of before we go back to the solicitor. And then hopefully they'll give us the okay to say, yeah, go ask those questions, get that clarity. And then we'll write back to the other side solicitor, let's say within a week. That's what you'd be kind of hoping. You'd be hoping a week to go through title, get instructions from your client, and ultimately go and raise some queries with the purchaser, with the seller solicitor, which really are really common. There'll always be certain queries. Some might be minor, some might be less minor.
Sure. And in my experience, I'll just share my lengths of time. I think the quickest I've seen it done is with the purchasing of an apartment in Dublin, where, say, we went sale agreed on the first of a month, and at the end of the second month, so in 2 months' time, we had the keys in our hand. That's as fast as I've ever seen it done. And then, say, with the buying of a house in Dalkey, I think it took actually 14 months to get the whole thing done because there were boundary issues. So, James, can I just ask you, like, assuming everything is going according to plan, that's all good news, but it's where what are the issues, the things that go bump in the night when it comes to property? What are the things that you've seen screw things up or delay things, or possibly cause the sale to collapse or the purchase to collapse?
It's really like when a client asks this kind of question, like, how long are we looking at? It's very difficult to see where the 3 months, 4 months, 5 months comes into it, because, the process is theoretically straightforward. There is nothing, there's nothing miraculous about any of this. It's just that these things tend to be quite unique, and things happen in their own ways. I think some a more obscure one that had caused a property to fall through on us earlier this year in early 2020, about this time last year, was there was infestation of rats that the surveyor found out. So our guys were kind of prepared to take that, but only on the basis that this issue was dealt with. And the seller was saying, no, you're buying it as is. This is a secondhand property. You've viewed it yourself. This is the property. And so they walked away. They said, we have limits. So it's okay. It's not that's kind of on one extreme.
Yeah.
The more common thing is, for instance, and I don't know, maybe we'll focus, let's say, on the rural setting for the purpose of this discussion, is septic tank. The septic tank is outside the boundary of the house. It's in the neighbor's field. That's never was caused an issue because the neighbor is the house owner's brother.
Yeah.
And, it is all just kind of developed organically over time. But now we, as purchasers solicitor, we need a specific way leave for that.
As in a right of way or something?
Yeah, it's in effect a right of way, but it's less to do with the people passing over and back and more to do with the pipes passing over and back and being there. And then also giving a right if we need to go out and fix it and inspect it or whatever the case may be. So we now need to get those agreed. We now have another party involved. We now may have another solicitor involved. All of that, those kind of hurdles have to be jumped. Then let's say there's a bank financing it. We need to okay this with the bank. We say, the septic tank is out there. And again, that has its own delays. So even though everything might be more or less perfect on that, except for this little thing, we've added 4 weeks onto it kind of easily, and pretty quickly. There's 4 weeks I've added on just to deal with this discrepancy, which again, in practice caused no issues, and maybe in practice wouldn't cause an issue in the future. But as a purchaser and as a purchaser solicitor, you're not taking a chance. There's no chance to be taken on these kind of sums of money. So that's a kind of that's a common one. There's also if we're talking high value properties, and let's say $1 million plus, we're then into the realm where the seller needs to get a capital gains clearance certificate. Again, the theory with revenue is these issue within 1 to 2 days, and that often does happen. Issue sometimes though is if the seller isn't registered for certain taxes. I don't even know the intricacies of what tax they need, but let's say an example we came upon recently that delayed it for really 3 or 4 months was where the husband and wife who owned the property were selling the property. The husband was, I don't know what you want to call him, the businessman, and the wife worked in the home. She therefore wasn't registered for this type of tax and that type of tax. She now, because she was a joint owner, had to get registered for those kind of things before the cert could issue. And again, that just took an inordinate amount of time, unfortunately, months. And so everyone is pulling their hair out, and whatever was going on internally in revenue was going on, and we didn't have control over that. And everyone lost control until revenue had done their thing. So again, once that issue sale closes, so there really are there are a variety of things. Another common one that we're seeing maybe increasingly is the use to which the building that you're buying was put, maybe is to be put. An example might be where a garage has been used as the granny flat. And now that is generally done, not always, of course, outside the scope of what you're allowed to use your garage for, which is meant to be not for human habitation. So sometimes on that, the purchaser might be uneasy, but more reality, the banks, the funder is uneasy about that and needs declarations about this and that. And sometimes it's significant enough. Sometimes they get cold feet almost and will pull financing. But generally, it can be overcome with undertakings not to use the property in this way and that way, and it will only be used for what as it was granted permission for. And then less controversially, but again, it can add to a delay. Sometimes is if the attic was converted and this was advertised, this has been sold as a store for building regulations reasons, but the reality is it's being used as a bedroom, and it will be used as a bedroom in all likelihood, sometimes done out of compliance with building regulations, and therefore, we need to get declarations to do with this and that to make sure we're not buying something that is subject to could be subject to an enforcement notice by local council to get rid of the attic conversion, or something draconian like that. So it can really vary, but they're just a flavor of some things we've come across in the last few months.
Okay, so let's assume then, and I can understand when you get this parcel of paperwork from the seller solicitor, you've no idea what's in this parcel. So it's very hard for you to say, well, it's going to take us 3 months to go through this parcel, because there might be a nightmare in there in terms of boundary or planning or divorces or a title or anything.
Yes.
But so let's assume you've opened up this little packet of horrors or delights, whatever it proves to be. You've worked your way through it, and now you're happy to say to your purchaser, the paperwork's in order enough for you. We're happy now that you can sign it. So what happens next then if a person's buying for cash?
Yeah, absolutely. So what happens next is we say, we're ready to sign. How do you want to sign? So do you want to come into the office and we'll have a meeting? We'll sit down, we'll act as your witness. Or do you want to authorize us to sign on your behalf in trust for you, which we can do. So
and they can do that via a digital signature from Los Angeles or something?
So we, for instance, prepare a little letter. We email that to them. They'd print off that email or sign it digitally and email it back to us. And that's authorizing us for our file, that's all, just to sign contracts on your behalf as agents in trust for a purchaser. And it can proceed that way. There is another way, and like contracts are less, the formalities of signing a contract, even though it's the binding document, are less stringent than with the actual deed of transfer, the thing that vests the property in the purchaser's name. The contract can actually operate by scanned copy. So we can email it to you, you can print it off, scan it. We probably put a special condition in the contract to just say, digital, what a scanned copy signatures are acceptable. That'll generally wash. There'll be no issues with that usually. So yeah, remote signatures are increasingly common, even for local people who couldn't be bothered driving 20 minutes. And it's completely understandable, So we'd email them over and they'd come back. So
so whether you're living 20 minutes down the road or over in Nebraska or in Sydney, Australia, you can do it online.
Absolutely, yeah. Online to sign a contract isn't an issue in whatever way you want us to sign on your behalf, you to sign electronically. That's all okay. The second thing we'll be asking to progress past that stage is we'll be asking for your balance deposit. So you've already mentioned, Breffney, that you the selling agent will have collected a booking deposit, as called, maybe 1 to 3%. We'll be then asking for the balance up to 10% deposit. So you have to pay 10% deposit to bind the contract. By and large, sometimes there are exceptions, but by and large, 10% of the purchase price. So let's say you collect the 10,000, we might need to collect a balance of 30,000, and we will send that money to the other side solicitors with signed contracts.
Okay, so at this stage, the deal is on. You're in this deal. You are obliged to buy it. You've paid now 10% of the purchase price and you've signed the contract. Okay, so then what happens next?
Well, we don't have a legally binding contract yet.
Oh, because the seller hasn't signed it yet.
Exactly. So sometimes you can feel like you almost, you feel like you've owned it for years at this stage, and they could still walk away. They could still send you back your money, send back the contracts, or shred the contracts and walk away. So until we receive one part contract, so we'll sign the contracts two parts, so they can have one, you can have one. Until they send back your one, signed by them and dated, only then have we a signed contract. So that's going to be, say, 10 days after you send back the signed contracts to us.
Okay, so the buyer signs first, pays the balance of up to 10%, then usually within 10 days, the seller has signed. Okay, now it's a binding contract for both parties.
Yeah, exactly. And so there will be a closing date specified in that contract. Now, in practice, that closing date tends to be relatively flexible, where there isn't a chain of transactions, where there are a chain of transactions, like I'm buying this house and then I need to get out of this house to get into that house. Those closing dates become very rigid and heavily negotiated. However, when that's not the case, and generally speaking, that isn't the case, closing dates tend to be rather flexible, saying, can we close in 3 weeks? Grand. Can we close in 4 weeks? No problem. It's generally fine. But whatever the case may be, a period of time will then be given to allow the seller get out their stuff, hand over vacant possession of themselves, obviously, but also of their stuff. So that 2-week period will allow that stuff to be done. It'll allow the purchaser to make sure their finances are in order, get all the money in, and get it over to the solicitor. And then from a legal point of view, what's going on in the background is the seller is going into their solicitor and they're signing all the documents. They're signing the deed of transfer, the family home declaration, the Section 72, a whole suite of declarations and documents have been signed for closing day. And these are the kind of the relevant documents, they're the title documents, they're the thing that will show that ownership has now gone from seller to buyer. And that they will be sent in advance of closing generally to the purchaser's solicitor and held by the purchaser's solicitor in trust until the day of closing, at which point the money will flow, the documents will be released, and ultimately keys will be released, all going well.
Okay. So there will be some time elapsed then between the time of the contract being legally binding and you getting the keys, and in that time all those things will happen.
2 weeks. 2 weeks is really the minimum. That's you very rarely see a closing date within 2 weeks of contracts. So 2 to 4 weeks would be typical.
Very good. And then the buyer can expect to get the property. They will specify how they expect to get the property. They may have negotiated that they like to keep that couch and this chandelier, but usually they will expect to get vacant possession of the property.
Absolutely, yeah. And so the contents is something you'd recommend having that discussion relatively early on. Oftentimes with the selling agent, you're saying to them, what are the sellers leaving and what are they taking? And that's always subject to change, and most of this stuff is, but you'll get a good sense from the seller's agent is what's going to be left here, and that'll allow you to plan, I suppose, as a purchaser.
Very good. Okay, so it's 2 weeks have now passed, and now I'm the purchaser, and I get a call from the selling agent to say it's all clear. You are welcome to come in and collect the keys. And that's how it goes. And James, can I just ask you, in Ireland, I think people aren't used to the concept of buyer beware. In Ireland, it's very much up to the buyer to buy, not to do his due diligence. The seller really isn't obliged to disclose anything, fix anything, do anything, really, are they?
No, absolutely. So that's ultimately where this investigation of title due diligence comes in. And that's why you need a thorough solicitor, a good solicitor, because ultimately most of this stuff, when you look at a house, there's just a house. There's nothing readily obvious that there's a boundary issue. The neighbor doesn't come out and tell you there's a boundary issue, or the septic tank is situated there or elsewhere. So yeah, it's very much buyer beware. You need to be careful. You need to ensure that you know what you're getting into, which is generally fine. Title issues. All these things tend to be rectifiable, but you don't want to be left in a situation like we do see situations where people, and someone might, for instance, we saw a case recently in Ireland where a big a corporate fund and a haulage company went to High Court for injunction, and this was in relation to the use of a right of way. Again, this ultimately comes back to when was the property purchased and what was said about this right of way at that time. That because it all ultimately comes back to what you know. So was there a right of way there that wasn't registered? Was it just a verbal right? Was it a right of way acquired by long user? And now this case, they're claiming damages of hundreds of thousands, I know millions. And ultimately, it just comes down to, well, what was the position when these guys bought the property? So that's really why you need to be so careful. And as a solicitor, you're always so careful because you've kind of seen the other side of it. You've seen people come back to you and say, what's the story here? And you kind of need to be able to go back through your file and have an answer.
Yeah, sure.
The alternative isn't good.
No, absolutely. So then just to summarize, James, and I so appreciate you talking it all through, what I'm hearing you say is that when you get the sealed packet of, as you say, a buyer goes to look at the house. They love the house, they love the land, they love the views, but they don't know how the legalities of that all stand. And as you say, it could be that there's an infestation of something, woodworm, dry rot, rats, whatever. It could be that the attic is built or something's built, it doesn't have planning permission. It could be that the septic tank dealing with the foul water from the property is on someone else's land. It could be that there's a right of way over your land, or you thought you had right of way over some land and it's not. It could be that you think you own all these fields, but you actually own all those fields. It could be that the person selling it doesn't have the title that they thought they had. It could be that they haven't asked for the title from the bank and it takes a darn long time to get the deeds over to you. So while you go in and the estate agent is smiling and you're happy and the sun is shining and everything's looking great, that's step one. And then we all have to get in under the hood. You get in under the hood of all the documents, and then the buyer gets in under the hood with their team of experts, the structural surveyor, the builder, the radon expert, the septic tank expert, the drains expert, the whatever. So between the two doing their good work, then by the end of it, you should have good title to a good property that you're happy with.
Yeah, and anything that a defect is, you're on knowledge of it, you're on notice of it, you know about it, you say, I'm okay, I can live with that. Again, which is a common, and lots of people take commercial decisions, say, look, I love the property, I'm not gonna lose it over some kind of relevant minor thing that didn't affect the last guy. It's fine, it's fine. Let me relax about this whole thing. So that certainly is the case. It's either perfect or it's good enough for me, and both are good. And then, look, at the end of that, you get the keys, the buyer gets the keys, job's done as far as they're concerned. But just in the background, from a solicitor's perspective, a stamp duty return will be filed in and around immediately after closing. You actually have 44 days to pay it. We keep that quiet enough because we need to make sure that it's all done in good time. We don't want penalties and interest. So you file your stamp duty return, which on residential
maybe you just
property,
explain what stamp duty is actually, and that brings us to the costs associated with buying a property. So stamp duty, James.
So stamp duty is a tax from Irish revenue for your signing a certain documents, and depending on the type of document or the type of property, the level of stamp duty varies. So in Ireland, residential stamp duty is 1% of the purchase price. So if it's an 800,000 euro house, it's 8,000 euro is the stamp duty. If there's an exception to that for residential property, if it's above 1 million euro, anything above 1 million euro is now at 2% stamp duty. So I won't embarrass myself with maths, but if it's 1.2 million, it's 1% of a million, 2% of 200,000.
Okay.
So that is payable on closing, and that money will need to be with the solicitor kind of at the same time as the money's been transferred to purchase the house. A solicitor won't accept a situation where the purchaser pays the money to purchase the house but doesn't pay the stamp duty and say, I'll get you later for that. That won't be acceptable to any solicitor. He needs the money in his account to pay that, because that's certainly a legal obligation to do that.
Okay, so that's the stamp duty. So that's an additional cost when you're buying the house.
Absolutely.
And then in general, do solicitors charge a percentage of the house price, or just to give a ballpark, what should people expect to spend on solicitors' fees?
Yeah, so there's
roughly.
No, of course, there's a huge variation. I think traditionally speaking, the purchase price informed what the solicitor's legal costs would be on the house. And that has sort of stopped now, by and large, insofar as it's a very competitive market now, the legal profession. So it kind of, while the purchase price will have some impact on the price because of risk, because of associated workload, the purchase price, if you're buying a 100,000 house, you won't pay the same if you're buying a €1 million house in legal costs. I don't think that'll be the case with any solicitor, but it won't sort of track the purchase price in a linear way.
Okay.
It will ultimately come down to how the solicitor approaches his workload, and it's basically determined by the solicitor, and there can be quite a price range, and the person needs to ultimately be satisfied with the person they're appointing as solicitor. A lot of shopping around will probably get you good value for a solicitor, and that's for the purchaser to do if they so choose, but it mightn't always lead to the best results for the purchaser, we would suggest.
Sure. And in my experience, and you can tell me what you think of this, I've seen probably legal fees start at around 5,000 for buying a house, and upwards, depending
I
on
think if you're buying a sort of a modest rural house in Ireland, I think it would be less than 5,000. You'd be slightly less than 5,000 plus VAT. All the solicitors' legal costs will be quoted excluding VAT. So if it's 4,000, it's 4,000 plus 23% VAT. So it's always going to be a little bit more than it sounds.
Yeah.
But if you're buying a big property for $1 million euro,
it'll be more.
It'd be unlikely that you'll get it for €5,000 legal.
Sure.
So,
and then, so we've covered, you buy the house, you pay the house price, you pay your solicitor's fees, you pay your stamp duty to stamp it afterwards. Are there any additional costs to owning a property in Ireland that we should know about?
There's a couple other bits from that sort of channel through our office. The first other one is after you file a stamp duty return, you send you send a deed of transfer plus a couple other documents sometimes to the Property Registration Authority, and they are like a state body in effect, and they work in the background at putting your name on the title document. Kind of simple. Sometimes you're buying part of a property, so they will work on mapping the property and putting your name on the title document. So you have to pay a fee for that. Again, that's linked to the purchase price. That runs from anywhere between, say in practice, €600 and €800 to the PRA. That's for them. If there's a bank charge to go on title, that's €175 for them. On closing, you'll do closing searches. You're required to make sure that the seller at the last minute wasn't adjudged to be insolvent or bankrupt, to make sure that something wasn't put on the property by way of a judgment mortgage at the last minute, which will invalidate and stymie a sale. You will do a closing search on just on the day of closing, literally, which will cost about €90 to €100 with a law searching office. And then it's very much advisable that when you're doing your investigation of title, that a planning search will be conducted to make sure there is nothing in the kind of planning ether which relates to the property which you didn't know about. So, for instance, the road widening scheme is operating just outside the house, and it's going to take a bit of your garden. Very unlikely, but you never know. Also, that it might show up a planning permission which you haven't seen. This wasn't provided to you. It's like, well, where is this planning permission and what does it relate to? Again, it's advisable to do it when you're buying a property. You're seen to be on notice of whatever is on the statutory registers for planning.
Okay, so they expect that you're going to do your own research in terms of planning. They don't have to tell you.
Yeah, and you're certainly entitled to ask them all about planning. Like really drag them over the coals on the planning side of things. But there is that associated responsibility. Well, you have to go and do your own bit on planning as well.
Okay. And then there's a cost of owning property in Ireland. It's a small local property tax that you pay.
Yeah, you pay that annually. That generally speaking, the purchaser will be registered for that on the filing of the stamp duty return. Those two systems seem to be linked, and a letter from local property tax, which is an arm of revenue, will be sent out to the property, kind of saying, here's your PIN, here's your local property tax number. We'll write to you again when you owe us money, kind of November time of the year, and it'll be a few €100 generally.
Yeah, it's only a few hundred. It's a very modest. So it's an annual charge that you pay, but it's not a huge charge. It's like
not at all. And when you're purchasing a property, it will be the responsibility of the seller to have that paid up for that year, and then you'll pay them back. You apportion it for that year, and again, it's small money. It's €90 this way or that way, or €100. So. But it's just another little administrative thing to be thinking about on closing.
Okay, brilliant, James. So it does sound like if I was listening to this and I was abroad thinking, I would feel a little bit reassured that a good solicitor will check everything through, and that the estate agents that they're dealing with at least are all licensed and insured, which is and regulated.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's scope to have good faith in the property purchase system. So if I was a prospective purchaser living abroad, it's nice to have some feet on the ground. The solicitor isn't that. We're if I'm your client, you say, hey, can you go down and can you check this and check that? I'm likely to say, not really.
No.
I'm not doing that, I'm afraid. I don't know, have the expertise, probably, whatever. It's not my job. So having feet on the ground is definitely a good thing. So you can check out X, Y, and Z. So you can meet and liaise with surveyors to make sure this thing hasn't been lost in communication or translation. So some feet on the ground from a practical perspective, and then a good solicitor. Very often, either those people, your feet on the ground or your solicitor, will be able to recommend surveyors or mappers that might be required, or whoever. And I think that kind of a duo of a good solicitor and someone who you can talk to practically and has to see this and check that team of two will kind of see you through, all going well, both doing their jobs properly.
Yeah. Okay, and any final thoughts for someone thinking of buying in Ireland? Well, I think that to me is a final thought, actually, which is have confidence. If you're using a solicitor and you've got someone locally to help you, and you're at least, we flagged some of the issues that can be deal breakers or certainly delay things. So the more information you have, the better prepared you are.
I think the process, some people find it stressful. It's a complete personal way of viewing the world. In some respects, it's quite straightforward. All the stuff is, if I'm talking to you about an issue with a property you're trying to buy, it's unlikely that you're just going to not know what I'm talking about. That it's very abstract. They're practical. By and large, issues are practical. They're generally solvable. I've great faith in the process in Ireland, and I think, I mean, rural Ireland, it's as good a place to buy as any in terms of the legalities of it, in terms of ease of purchase, and as a place to live. So I think, there's no roadblock. If it's something you want to do, there isn't any major hurdle to jump.
Fantastic, James. Thank you very much indeed.
No, and thank you, Reffney. It's always a pleasure to talk.
And I'll have all James's contact details, etc., in the show notes.